And we're back with episode 6 of the podcast now. Hard to believe we're already 6 episodes in. But we've had a solid week of games with the Champions Classic, which we heavily previewed on Tuesday. Going to kick the show off with that, diving into what those games looked like. With the first one, jumping right into it, was Michigan State and Kansas. I didn't get to see a ton of this game. I was at practice for most of it. But Michigan State, Kansas seemed like it was a close game. I know you saw probably all of it. Kansas ended up winning by 6, I believe. Right?
Yeah. I believe it was 6. Yeah. For that game, honestly, especially at the beginning, it was pretty ugly overall, especially the first 8 minutes. I think the only guy that scored in the first 8 minutes was Hunter Dickinson. So it got pretty ugly, but that was kind of the game plan throughout the entire game for Izzo defensively, was to let Dickinson play one-on-one against Sapala and against guys like Booker and Kohler. And, Dickinson had a really good day, but they cut off all the other guys for Kansas, which was in the game plan. And, it kind of worked defensively, just other things just didn't really go their way. They were content playing that way. They cut off Mayo. They cut off Store as well. So I think they did a pretty good job in that regard. They just didn't have enough firepower on the offensive end. The guards looked really good overall. They looked like they had promise at least, but overall Michigan State just didn't shoot the ball well enough. They shot 3 of 24 from deep, but overall I thought there were some real positives for this team, especially on the defensive end. And I liked how the guards carried themselves throughout the game with Jace Richardson and Jeremy Fears. I thought they looked pretty good. But Izzo knows what he needs to work on, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And overall, the front court depth looks pretty good. They contained Dickinson to a degree. I mean, I think he went 12 for 21 from the field. So, but overall, that was the whole plan all along. And they stayed in the game the entire time until Kansas just went on a little mini run late in the game from the 6-minute mark to the 4-minute mark in the second half. And that's ultimately where Kansas ran away with the game.
Yeah, and it's going to be tough to beat Kansas as it is, right? And especially if you're not shooting the ball well, you're not going to have a very easy time beating them. Now the other game that night was Duke and Kentucky, who we talked about in our preview on Tuesday. We talked about how we thought Duke could maybe run away with it if Kentucky didn't shoot the ball well. And Kentucky started that game 5 for 5 from 3. So right from the jump, I was like, Duke could be in for a long night, right? Especially with the concerns that we talked about with their offense as it gets later in the game. They get into more of a half-court style. And they struggled with that. It kind of felt like Mark Pope had a perfect game plan for, we're going to let Flagg get his, and we're going to shut everyone else down, kind of. Knipple was 5 for 20, so a little abnormal from him there. But overall, the Duke guard play, to me, just hasn't been good enough. Tyrese Proctor hasn't taken that leap. Caleb Foster's shot looks pretty strange right now. He's getting wide open looks, and it just looks very rigid. So obviously not very encouraging for their guards, especially as they go to play teams like North Carolina, who are more guard dominant. So overall, Duke just didn't play a very, very good game. And even with their offense being slowed down, oddly enough, they weren't getting back in transition in the second half. They were getting beat down the floor, even off of made shots, or, the bigs for Kentucky were really running the floor hard and getting down to the rim, and Kentucky was finding them, getting easy baskets. And it just felt like Kentucky had all the energy in the second half. Duke was, I thought, very flat, and was letting Kentucky dictate the pace of the game, when Duke's really going to thrive off of getting stops and getting out in transition. But Kentucky dominated the pace and allowed themselves to do exactly what they wanted with that game.
Yeah, absolutely. From what I saw, I thought Duke controlled a lot of this game. It was basically the last 10 to 12 minutes, which obviously is the most important part of the game that you need to be better in. And we had problems with Duke executing in the half court late in games. We talked about this in the preseason. It came to fruition on Tuesday night. Like, Shire was just content with giving the ball to Cooper Flagg and letting him execute in isolation, which, like, I know he was trying to pick on guys like Brea, but that team has pretty solid one-on-one defenders. And that's just, it's not really Flagg's best asset is to be an ISO scorer. Like, and it showed in the last minute of that game where, he slips in the corner with 10 seconds left. That's all anybody's talking about is what he did in the last minute of that game when he was truly like the best player on the floor. And it really wasn't even close for the entire game. Up until the last 5 minutes of the game, like, Cooper Flagg was easily the best player on the floor, but people just talk about the 2 turnovers he made late in the game. And it's a little bit frustrating. I mean, it's probably from people that didn't watch the entire game. They just watched the highlights of Flagg, making those. They were bad decisions. They weren't great plays.
They're not. But I also put some fault. I put some fault on Duke's coaching staff in that situation a little bit, right? And their guards, because that's what we're going to. Obviously, Flagg was great, but our best play is just an ISO play. Like, they're treating it almost like the NBA. They need to run offense, and they need their guards to be better to help put Flagg in better situations to score. But it certainly doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. Proctor's just not been good. He's not been good.
Outside of the first 3 minutes, like, I thought he was going to go for 40 after the first 3 minutes of the game, but it just didn't happen. And Foster had open looks. Knipple had some open looks, and they just didn't drop. Like, they're going to make those shots more often than not. Like, I mean, I think Foster's going to figure out his shot. Like, I think he's going to be fine. He shot like almost 40% from 3 last year. He's going to hit the open ones, and he's going to get a lot of them. But yeah, overall, like, the game plan, like, it was not great late in the game. Like, the late game execution, Shire got out coached the last 10 minutes of this game.
Yeah.
And
Sion James,
I would like to give credit.
James getting hurt there and not coming back, I think, was pretty detrimental to them. Because to me, he's just that steadying force at guard that, he can make some open shots, but he also defends. And I thought they definitely could have used him down the stretch. And I don't know what the deal is too with Duke, but they need to figure out. They need to put some Pedialyte in the locker room or something. But Maluak and Flagg in the first 2 games, they're cramping up, right? They need these guys down the stretch. And same thing happened a few years ago, if you remember, with Banchero when they played, I think it was Gonzaga, right? Late in the game, he started cramping up, and he was giving them the work, and then he was unable to really finish the game. So I don't know what the deal is with Duke and their training regiment, but their guys can't be going out in big games like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Maluach was a big reason why, like, his defensive presence not being there was definitely a factor throughout that game. Yeah. Like, Duke was a smaller team when he was off the floor. Like, Malik Brown playing the small ball 5. Like, Brown's a great defender, but they're going to have limitations on the glass if he's playing the 5 for extended minutes.
Yeah, no. And what was even crazier to me was Jackson Robinson wasn't even good in this game, right? Like, early in my preseason predictions, I almost had Jackson Robinson as a 3rd-team All-American or close to it, right? And he was 0 for 4, 27 minutes, basically was out there running, getting some good cardio in, but wasn't very good. Had 1 point, just as many turnovers as points. But, Kentucky just played hard. They played really hard, good energy. Andrew Carr, I thought, was really good, especially in the second half. When Maluak was out, he was able to kind of do some things off the dribble, and when he was in, that's something that he struggles a little bit with, is coming out to the perimeter and guarding guys off the bounce. He's much better in around the rim. So I thought Carr was a huge piece to why they were able to win this game.
Yeah, absolutely. He made a big play late in the game as well, against Maliwatch, actually, faking in the lane, getting him to bite.
Yeah,
And it was a huge and one late in that game. And
yeah,
Ortega Owe always makes incredible winning plays. Like, he doesn't usually show up in the box score, like scoring wise, but he's your do it all, that Swiss Army knife defender. And he's just a great player. He typically goes unnoticed, but he's spectacular as well.
yeah, yeah, no doubt. So definitely that wasn't the outcome I was expecting. I thought, Duke would either win a close one or they'd blow them out. I wasn't Kentucky winning this game never really was a thought that went through my head, but good for them. The Mark Pope era is off to a good start, and maybe we're starting to see that Coach Cal really wasn't all that he's talked up to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was just I thought it was the experience of this group.
Yeah,
I think they play mostly fifth years in the starting lineup, and it just looked like they knew what they were doing down the stretch. There was no panic down the stretch, and Duke's playing three freshmen pretty much at all times. So I think they're going to figure it out to a degree. Like, the half court offense is still like a long-term problem for me. Like, especially if Foster isn't making shots. Knipple's not going to shoot 1 for 8 from 3 every night, but if those guys don't hit shots, it's going to put Flag in some tough spots, and he's going to have to play in isolation all the time down the stretch. And hopefully Shire figures out something else within the offense to execute late in the half court, but it's just something to keep an eye on.
pretty impressive from Pope to get these guys playing this well early in the year too. With not one of these guys had ever played together before. They're all coming from different programs, and the fact that he's able to get them ready to play a team like Duke for their third game of the year and knock them off is pretty impressive.
Yeah, they just have so much depth and so much experience, and it's a pretty open system as well. Like, they all can play off of each other well because they all shoot it so well.
Yeah,
It's a fairly easy transition, but you still have to give them like a lot of credit for coming together in a summer and figuring everything out. And they're running away right now.
and just being like defensively connected. Like the other night, like we said, they had a good game plan for putting Duke into those tough half court situations, and they were connected and got stops when they needed to, and put Duke into tough situations. So definitely props to them. Seems like I was fairly high on them, but seems like maybe I sold them a little bit short. I don't know. I know it's early, but
Yeah, they're a great team. It's like a little bit cliche, but like, they do probably need a go-to guy. Like, down the stretch, you're playing an elite defense in a tournament setting. They showed it against a Duke defense that I think is really, really good. But you're going to need that, a guy that you can go to down the stretch. It looked like Andrew Carr can be that guy, because right now it doesn't really look like Robinson can go get you a bucket in the lane. It'd beat a guy off the dribble. Like, he seems a little bit too perimeter oriented. But if you can go to a guy like Andrew Carr at the mid post and tell him to go and make a tough shot, like, that's going to be big for them.
Yeah. Kentucky to me feels like that team that doesn't have the highest ceiling, but they pretty much have a safe floor. I think they're going to be very steady and they can compete with pretty much anyone. But their ceiling, I think, like, I don't view them necessarily as a national title contender, but they're going to win. They're going to win a bunch of games, and they're going to compete because of experience and good coaching. But as for their ceiling, it's just not the highest of high.
Yeah, I don't know if Mark Pope's ever won a tournament game, actually, for what it's worth. Obviously, this is the most talented team he's ever had. Like, he had some talented BYU teams, but they actually never got over the hump and won a tournament game. So I wouldn't put a ton of stock into it, but this is his most talented roster, so I think they're going to be okay.
Yeah, for sure. Now, in this last week and a half now of games, there have been some players, some teams that have stood out, good or bad. I know there are a couple that were on your radar, Cody.
Yeah, just a few guys that I've watched that really don't get any of the spotlight at all. A couple mid-major. Well, I'm not going to call St. Mary's a mid-major, but they technically are. The guy I'm going to call out is Paulus Morauskas, who is an Arizona transfer, and he had a lot of upside, but he's been incredible so far. He's averaging 18 points, 13 rebounds, and 3 assists through 3 games, and they're basically running their offense through him when they still have the reigning WCC Player of the Year and Augustus Marciulionis on their roster, and they basically handed him the keys to the offense. I mean, he's been incredible so far. He's coming off a game, 17 points, 15 rebounds, and 6 assists against a good mid-major in Akron. I mean, he's doing this against quality mid-major competition, and this team did need another guy to play through, and he looks like a guy that can kind of raise their ceiling. Like, you always look at the St. Mary's team as a team that has a super high floor, but no like real upside to make a deep run into the tournament because the offense and the creation is so limited. But looking at a guy like Morauskas, I think they could win a couple tournament games because he's so talented. He's a 6'9" forward that can basically do it all. He can be a pick and pop big. You can run offense through the guy. He's been incredible.
Yeah, no, they definitely needed that, right? They lost Mahaney to UConn, of course, and they, like you said, their floor is usually pretty high, but they're not a team. Sweet 16 seems to be about the bow out stage for them. It's just really not a team that's primed for deep runs in March. But if they can get this consistent play from him, that can definitely give them a chance at least to advance past that.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been great. I mean, he didn't even get run at Arizona, really. I think he played like maybe 2 minutes a game in garbage time, but he's really showing how talented he is and the upside that he has.
Yeah. Now the other player, D2 transfer for you, from Central Oklahoma, Jaden Wells.
Yeah, he's the all-time 3-point leader at Central Oklahoma. He broke that record last year, transferred to UT Arlington. And I tuned into the game last night against USC, who they almost took down. And it was 100% because of him. He went on a run. I think in the first 5 minutes of this game, he went 5 for 5 from 3 and had 17 points. He was absolutely lighting up this USC defense that looks like it has a ton of issues. But he was the quickest, like most talented shooter on the floor. And I mean, this guy's probably one of the most talented shooters in the country that nobody knows about. He finished the night 7 of 10 from 3 and had 27 points. And in the game before that, I believe he made 5 threes and had 17. Like, it's just a guy that is super hard to contain, smaller guard, but super quick. And definitely just the guy I want to give a shout out. Just is a UT Arlington guy. Those types of schools don't get, a ton of publicity, especially like on this pod so far. But it's definitely a great player and a guy to keep an eye on if you're diving down into the mid-major ranks.
Yeah. You're a sicko for watching that game, really. I mean, UT Arlington and USC. What was that? Like an 11 o'clock tip?
That was an 11 o'clock game. Didn't get done till about 1. It was a great game, so I had to stay up. For it.
That's wild. That's wild that game is getting screen time. But hey, good for them. Good for Jaden Wells for piquing your interest a little bit. Now for me,
they almost stole that game too. It was a 2-point game. They were in it the entire game.
Yeah. Good for them. Now a guy for me that if anyone listened to earlier podcasts, we talked about our breakout players, and one of mine was Nick Martinelli at Northwestern. And I feel like every game that Northwestern's played so far, they've played 3 games. I've texted Cody at some point and said, man, this guy's awesome. And he has been far and above what I ever would have expected. Like I talked about earlier in some episodes, he was a solid player for them when they had some injuries last year and they needed him to bring some scoring punch. And he looked like he had some good feel, but he's averaging 28.3 points, 9 rebounds on 73.8% shooting and 100% from three. Now, from three, I believe he's only attempted, or 7 for 7. So, I mean, he's just lighting it up against everyone right now. And Brooks Barnheiser hasn't even played yet for Northwestern. Now, the other thing is I was very low on Northwestern. This was a team that I was all over Ken Palm for why is this team in the top 50? There are teams behind them that should certainly be ahead of them. If Nick Martinelli is going to play like this and they're going to win games and Brooks Barnheiser isn't even back yet, this team might be pretty good in the Big Ten, right? Especially from what I've seen from some of these other teams in the Big Ten so far. Haven't been very impressed with Oregon, UCLA, and some of the other teams in there. This team could be a lot better than I thought they would be without Boo Buie.
Yeah, I might be buying stock in Northwestern right now. I mean, Nick Martinelli has been incredible. I knew he was like a solid, like at least like a secondary piece to this offense, but I mean, it's going to be him and Barnheiser running the show, and like those are, I mean, clearly two great scorers. I mean, Martinelli is like super crafty, but he's really lighting it up right now. I'm impressed. I didn't really notice like how good he truly was until I started watching this year. And I mean, this Northwestern team could have close to as good of an offense as they had last year when they had Boo Buie. I mean, and like Chris Collins typically runs a solid defensive scheme. So this team could have like, there's a little ceiling there with this group, like especially in the Big Ten, like you said, it's weak. So
there is, and Martinelli basically single-handedly kept them in that game against Dayton last weekend. Dayton's one of our top mid-major schools coming into the season, so that's a quality team that they hung around with and ended up only losing by 5. So, shout out to Nick Martinelli. Keep it up, man. Keep proving me right. Now, the other thing I'm going to get into seems to be a common theme. The Big East. Big East is terrible. Seton Hall is terrible. We haven't given them enough hate. They lost to Hofstra last night. Was it 48-47, 47-46, something like that?
Yeah, 49-48, I think.
Their team just can't score the ball. Prince Aligbe, who transferred from Boston College, barely played for them at Boston College last year. Certainly not an offensive piece. Is a player taking 9 shots for Seton Hall, and go figure, 1 for 9 last night. Just a terrible situation there at Seton Hall, and I might be going as far as to say that they're worse than DePaul. I'm not sure yet, but if this tells you how low I am on the Big East, the other night I was in Chicago, and Mercer basketball, who was there playing against DePaul, was riding around on scooters at like 11 o'clock at night. And I still didn't recommend people to take DePaul. That's how low I am on the Big East. And DePaul ended up winning that game by 30, which I'm pretty sure they probably haven't won a game by 30 in maybe their program history. I don't know. It's awfully close. So Big East, just total stinker right now.
Yeah, it's bad. You didn't even mention Villanova losing a second time. So
that's
got to be how
yet.
bad the Big East is if you're not even mentioning the team that you're lowest on in the country in Villanova.
Well,
I mean, but I was just looking through Ken Palm and see.
It's not that I'm the lowest on Villanova. It's that I have the most hatred towards them. Just based on their preseason ranking, 20th in Ken Palm. I'll continue to just harp on it. Horrible.
Yeah, I agree for sure.
I don't know where they're at now. You might have it memorized because you're just like that. But
I do. I actually have it up. So I think they're 56 right now. They actually went up. They went up with their performance against St. Joe's. They were sitting at 60 before that. Some teams must have had some real stinkers. But I was just looking through, going back to Seton Hall. They have the 258th rated offense on Ken Palm right now. I mean, it's ugly. You can't have that as a Big East school. Like you're going to lose a lot of games like that just from keeping teams in the game. You play a super slow pace, and the offense just it's just not there. I mean, granted, they are the 28th rated defense on KenPom. It's going to keep them in games, but it's also going to keep these mid majors that like Fordham's like the 13th rated team in the A10.
Yeah, yeah. But let's think about like in part why their defense is going to be rated a little bit better is because their offense is so bad that they have to play a slower pace, probably, right?
Yeah.
Like their pace can't be super high right now. Their number of possessions they're getting per game. I mean, it clearly can't be in a game that it was 49-48. Like I don't know the last time I've seen a Big East team play a non-power conference team and score in the 40s and lose. Like Hofstra just went at Seton Hall and won, scoring 49 points. That seems impossible. So Big East, just get out of my face.
Yeah, and this sucks for the top teams in the Big East because you're going to conference, like you have to go on the road and play Seton Hall. Like it's not an easy environment to play in, and their defense is very rock solid. So like a team like St. John's goes in there, you lose that game, and Seton Hall's sitting at below 500 on the season. It's really going to hurt your tournament resume. Like if St. John's is happening to sit on the bubble, like that's a loss that's going to come up, and you have to play this team twice. So. And like there's other landmines in there, like Villanova, if they keep falling off. Like DePaul, obviously not great, but they do have some scoring talent. Like there's so many landmines in this conference that could really hurt those top three teams because it really looks like there's only three like truly elite teams in this conference. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's only three that end up in.
Yeah. And there are going to be teams that go on the road and lose those games. Like that's going to happen. And it's going to, like Marquette's going to go on the road and lose to one of those teams probably at some point. And that's going to be a detrimental loss to them and their tournament chances. So definitely something to keep an eye on the Big East because of the gap between the top and the bottom.
Absolutely. Even Butler, like they lost to Austin Peay, and other teams stayed in the game with them as well. Like they don't look good at all.
Horrible. So speaking of Villanova, while we're talking about the Big East, I'm going to briefly mention they have a game tomorrow night against Virginia, another team we're super high on here at Mainly Hoops. They're 3.5-point favorites against the Cavaliers, who are now Tony Bennettless, as we talked about earlier in some other episodes. This would have been the game of the year probably 4, 5, 6 years ago. With where these two programs were at with Tony Bennett and Jay Wright and the national championships and all that. Now this is a game that, quite frankly, it's going to be on TNT, and I probably won't watch 1 second of it. Like this game will probably be scores in the 50s. Just a really ugly game, and Villanova probably is going to win because Virginia is just that bad. It's crazy to think that this game has fallen to the level that it's at.
Yeah, I mean, Virginia hasn't really been tested yet either, and they're only putting up 58 and 59 points against Campbell and one of the worst teams in the country in Coppin State. Like, it's ugly. They can't even break away from a team as a 27-point favorite, and it's just really ugly over there. And like, I don't even think the defense is necessarily that talented, and that's the staple of the Virginia program, even though it's not with Bennett anymore. Like Sanchez is a Bennett disciple, so the defense not being completely there, I mean, leads to avenues for Villanova winning this game. But I think it comes down to whoever's going to hand the game to the other team with how where these programs are at right now. I mean, I would be lying if I said I wasn't going to watch this game, but it's at 5:00. Nothing else is on. So who am I kidding? Like I'm 100% watching, but might have to turn it off if it gets really ugly.
I hope that the score is like 42-39 final or something, just for the sake of our next episode. I can't wait. Now, before we get too far into the weekend slate, wanted to briefly touch on a game that's happening tonight that we talked about on Tuesday, and that's Grand Canyon, Arizona State, which we previewed today as our game of the day. Tyon Grant Foster back for Grand Canyon. So this is a big game for them. Grand Canyon, I believe, is 5.5-point favorites, right? So as we mentioned, Grand Canyon hasn't looked great early. Had a 2-point win over Western Kentucky in their first game. Haven't been very good, but tonight's a real test against the Arizona State team that battled against Gonzaga last weekend. And I know everyone likes to go back to their preseason game against Duke, but that's not something I take a lot of stock in once the real season starts. And, they're hanging around with teams like Gonzaga who put it on Baylor opening night. This is a true test for Grand Canyon to see, are they really that legit mid-major that can go beat Power Fives, or, are they just kind of that mid-major that got hot last year?
Yeah, I mean, I think they absolutely are a team that could beat pretty much any team in the country, because they're going to walk into a game and probably be the more athletic team, especially on the perimeter. I mean, you have guys like Colin Moore, Ray Harrison, and Tyon Grant Foster, who are elite, at least 6'5" to 6'7" physical athletes that can drive by you at any time. They aren't great shooters, but it's just the pure physicality that could give any team in the country an issue. And then you bring in Jacoby Coles, who can space the floor a little bit for him, and you have two super athletic centers in Dennis Evans and I forget the other name. Luke War, I believe, is the other guy there. But yeah, I mean, and for ASU, like, they're getting so much disrespect just because of that preseason game, and it just doesn't feel like that's gotten away from them. Like, everyone, it's just lingering along with this program right now. But they're coming off of two really good performances. You beat dark horse WCC team in Santa Clara, and like, you're basically leading the entire game, and you played extremely well. And then you go to Gonzaga, and you could have won the game. Like, they had the lead in the second half. And I think there's a lot of scoring talent on this roster. Pretty much all 5 players that are on the floor at a time can all go get you a bucket. Like, they can score in isolation, and they aren't playing off of each other super well, but there's enough talent on this roster to where I think they figure some stuff out on the offensive end, because you have good shooting. I think Alston Mason's a really good guard coming from Missouri State. Bashir Shahad's been great so far. He put up 22 at Gonzaga. So he's been pretty good so far as well. And then BJ Freeman, who averaged 20 points a game last year in Milwaukee. Like, you have a lot of scoring talent, and it's not a typical Bobby Hurley, like, super aggressive defense, but it's something that I think he can get out of his team, because he does have solid athletes here. Like, I personally think Arizona State can walk away with this win tonight. And it completely, like, wouldn't surprise me if we came into the season and said, like, we overrated GCU a little bit. We talked about it on the last pod. All these mid-majors that go on a run in March, like, they won a game. It wasn't a major run, but they tend to get overvalued the next season. And I just think it's a spot where, it's 5.5 point spread. Like, I don't think the line should be 5.5. Like, I think Arizona State is much closer than that. I think these teams are it's closer to even than GCU being a 5.5, 6 point favorite.
Yeah, and for anyone that's wondering, 6-6 right now. Early.
This right.
Yeah, so that game tonight, obviously we already talked about Virginia Villanova tomorrow. A couple other big ranked matchups tomorrow night. First one being, or not the first one, but the one later in the evening, Ohio State and Texas A&M. Texas A&M sitting at 2-1 with their lone loss coming against UCF. They bounced back against the East Texas A&M Lions and Lamar University. So a couple of perennial powerhouses there. Might be the first 2 games that Wade Taylor shot over 50% in consecutive games in his career, maybe. So that'll certainly help the shooting percentages come season's end, with 4 for 7 and 5 for 8 in his last 2 games. So good for him. But Ohio State off to a strong start. Obviously, we talked about their win against Texas on opening night. So this is a big game for them. Big game. A&M needs it, I think, a little bit more Not that, I mean, it's so early in the season that nobody really needs it, but I think with their lone loss coming to UCF, I think getting a win against another Power Five school is definitely something they want to check off early or sooner rather than later. So this is a game I look for Texas A&M to win, and I'm going to actually make a bold prediction. I think Wade Taylor shoots over 50% for a third consecutive game tomorrow night.
Yeah. I mean, I personally don't really stand for Wade Taylor slander. It makes a ton of, like, he's never shot over 40% in his career, I believe,
No,
from the
I
floor.
like him.
Yeah. I think he's a super talented scorer. And, he has other guys that can play off of him now. He has CJ Wilcher. He has Zurich Phelps now, who played his first game against either Lamar or East Texas A&M. I'm not sure which one.
Texas A&M. He's played well their last two games. Yeah. He's actually been their leading scorer their last two games.
Gotcha. Yeah, he's a great defender for them too. Like, that's another area of concern that they had in the offseason was their ability to get out and defend shooters. Like, they're a super aggressive style. They like to load up in the lane and then try to get out the shooters off of the skip passes that other teams make. But they have the athletic defenders now that can get out to those shooters with playing this style. And I think they made great adjustments in the offseason. I love Pharrell Payne. I think he's a perfect Buzz Williams big. And for Ohio State, they played well. Like, they beat up on Youngstown. I think they beat them by 34 or something like that. And then, you obviously beat Texas on opening night. Texas looked dysfunctional. Like, the offense just wasn't there. We've slandered them enough, so I don't really need to get into it. But I think Ohio State is playing a little bit over its head. I will have an article out on this tomorrow talking about why I like A&M so much tomorrow. But Ohio State is shooting 48% from three through two games, and their opponents are shooting 20%. So I understand that Ohio State has good shooters on this roster. They have Thornton, they have Michi Johnson, they have John Mobley, who's been a pleasant surprise for them as a freshman. But they're obviously shooting over their heads. Like, Mobley's shooting 7 for 8 this year, and that's just not something that's going to continue. And I don't think it's going to continue in a hostile environment, playing at the Reed Center in College Station. I don't see them going on the road and shooting it this well. If A&M's going to shoot it well, it's probably going to be at home. And, you have CJ Wilcher coming off the bench. You have Manny Obaseki. All those guys can shoot it and play off of Wade Taylor. And I don't think we've seen the best out of this A&M offense. That I think they should have beat UCF. They controlled the game for 30 minutes. And it was just the last 10 minutes of the game. They only had one field goal in the last 6 minutes of the game. I expect that to change. There's a little bit of luck that goes into that stuff as well. But I like A&M a lot tomorrow. I think they win pretty convincingly.
I do too. I think Ohio State is being just tremendously overvalued right now. In part because their win over Texas is just, it's not as good as we maybe initially thought, right? Texas just isn't there yet, like we've talked about. And so I think that win isn't as good. They beat Youngstown State, not very good. This is their third game. They're going into a hostile environment. A&M is definitely going to want this one. I think I'm with you. I think A&M jumps out early and maybe puts it on them. I could definitely see a double-digit victory here.
Yeah, Ohio State passed them in KenPom. They're 15th now, and A&M is 18th. Ohio State, and they played 2 games, and I think they jumped 30 spots. I think they were 45 preseason. It's just a little bit too much of an overreaction from these ratings in general, but especially with those. It's a lot of shooting variance.
Yeah. Now the other game tomorrow, probably most people's game of the night. We've got Purdue hosting Alabama. Purdue obviously off to a pretty good start as we've noted, and Alabama going in there in a true road test for them early in the season. Really glad that they scheduled this game. Really excited to watch this one. This one that should tell some of these teams early on what they're really made of.
Yeah, I think they have a couple years left in this series as well, because they played in Toronto last year for Edey when they played Alabama. Now they're playing at Mackey, And now I think they have to go back to Tuscaloosa next year to finish off this series. But I think Alabama smokes them tomorrow. I think these Alabama guards are going to be way too much for this perimeter defense to handle. And Purdue does not have their front court rotation figured out. Like, if you're going to start Will Berg tomorrow, it's not going to be pretty. You're going to need to get him off the floor after 2 to 3 minutes in this game. Like, he started last game, played 16 minutes. If he plays 16 minutes, Mark Sears might go for 40, because you can't, in ball screens, like, if they see him on the floor, they're just going to give the ball to Sears in the half court, set a high ball screen. Wilberg has to basically play in drop coverage, and Sears is going to blow right by him and score at the rim almost every single time. Like, it's not going to be pretty for this Purdue defense that really, they don't have anything figured out right now. Partly because of Daniel Jacobson going down, who looked like he was going to be an elite rim protector and possibly like a defensive player of the year candidate in the Big Ten. But you play Kaufman-Rennan first in the front court, you kind of lose what Painter teams are so good at, and that's being elite on the glass on both sides of the ball. Like, they're not even rebounding well, and they're playing mid-major teams right now. They rank outside the top 100 in offensive rebound rate and defensive rebound rate. You play a team like Alabama, if they have an advantage on the glass, and if they have an advantage on the perimeter shooting-wise, and just overall athleticism on the perimeter to bother guys like Braden Smith and Lawyer, it smells like a blowout, in my opinion, regardless of where they're playing. I think they could play anywhere, and I think Alabama kind of runs away with this game. It's kind of a bold take. Alabama's a 2-point favorite tomorrow at Mackey, which feels a little bit crazy when you talk about a Purdue team, like a recent Purdue team, but I just don't see many avenues for Purdue being able to stop Alabama's offense.
Yeah, I don't either. I think that I think the only way really that Purdue stays in this game is because Matt Painter's such a good coach and Braden Smith carries them. Those are really the only two things that I could see contributing to them hanging around in this. I think Alabama's experience, I think their talent all around, I think, is just too great. And I'm like we've talked about, we're not super high on the Big Ten. Purdue just happens to be the default best team in that conference because it's just not that strong. But this Purdue team, in some of the years past, like, I wouldn't have them as the best team in this conference. They just happen to be right now. Alabama is one of the best teams in the country, and one of, if not the best team in the SEC alongside Auburn. So, I definitely look for Alabama to win this game. I don't really know if it'll be a blowout like you might suggest. I think that Purdue maybe is steady enough to figure some things out and produce enough offense to hang around a little bit. But I definitely foresee an Alabama victory on Friday night.
Yeah, and then, like, the problem with the Purdue offense in this game would be from Alabama's like athletic wing defenders just getting to stay at home, and you force Smith in the ball screens and you take away his playmaking, make him shoot in the mid-range, make him take 15 mid-range jumpers, because Smith will do that. He will shoot off of those ball screens almost every time if he doesn't have a read, like a guy cutting, or if he doesn't have a guy open, if the Alabama defenders aren't helping. Like, Smith could go for 30, and I still think Alabama wins this game.
Yeah. But should be a cool Friday night. Now, a few other games that are on the slate. Saturday is not looking like a very promising slate. Obviously, still college football season, so they try not to stack a bunch of good college basketball games on Saturdays right now. But tomorrow night we also have Arizona playing Wisconsin and Marquette playing Maryland. Now, I know Maryland hosting Marquette. Marquette's a team in that beloved Big East that has had some closer games than people might have expected with Central Michigan and George Mason. And Maryland has this game at home, right? And they've looked solid. And so I'm expecting Maryland to jump out here and knock off Marquette and put them down in the rankings, probably where they belong a little bit more. And Maryland might have a shot at jumping into the rankings next week, I think.
Yeah, I'm super high on Maryland. I do think they handle business here, and I think it's because of the front court. Julian Reese and Derek Queen, like, they don't have a matchup in this game. Like, they're going to get all over the offensive glass. Even like, and Maryland, they have good shooters now. Like, this isn't just like the Jameer Young show and then a bunch of guys who shoot 20% from three. Like, this is a good offense now. Like, Jacoby Gillespie and Selton Miguel as a combo, I think outweighs like what Jameer Young did by himself last year. And I think I would worry about the ball security a little bit because Marquette they're so good, especially in the turnover margin. Like, they turn you over at an elite rate every single year. They're typically top 10 in turnover rate. But I think Maryland's going to be overwhelming defensively as well, forcing Cam Jones to just go out and get his 25 to 30 and cut off everybody else because you have such good one-on-one defenders that you can force him into not being like extremely efficient. And Marquette doesn't really have like elite scorers outside of him. Like, Joplin can shoot it, Gold can shoot it, but he's really struggled so far. And then Stevie Mitchell and Ross, like, they're not threats. Like, you can help off of those guys as well and force them to make shots. Although Ross has been solid, long term, I don't think he's going to shoot at 40% from three. So I really like Maryland, and I think they're a team that you should buy stock in right now because I do think they could fly up the Big Ten rankings and like be a contender to win this conference.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right on the interior presence of Maryland. Ben Gold is really their only interior presence, if that's even what you want to call him. He'd much rather hang out around the 3-point line and jack threes, and I think he might weigh 175 pounds if he's lucky. He just has no interest in going in there and rebounding the basketball, which I think, Derek Queen had 20 rebounds in his first college game against Manhattan. And Julian Reese, of course, a veteran who, while he's not a player I love, he plays hard. He's aggressive on the glass. So I fully expect Maryland to dominate the offensive glass in this game. And I think they take care of business. This will be a big win for Kevin Willard. Get his team probably sneaking into the back end of the top 25 next week if they win this one.
Yeah. And Derek Queen's a great passer as well. So if they're going to send two guys at Derek Queen, he's going to be able to hit shooters or even hit Reese in the dunker spot. I think he's a pretty underrated passer. Yeah.
And the other one I briefly wanted to talk about is that Arizona-Wisconsin game. I know Wisconsin, that was one you talked about earlier as a game that you think Arizona could potentially be on upset alert.
Yeah. I mean, they could be. I was kind of looking back at last year's matchup where, like, I was looking at this as like Wisconsin can control the pace in this matchup and really force Arizona to operate in the half court consistently. And that's typically the area that Tommy Lloyd teams have struggled. And this team doesn't have the same kind of guard group that they typically have. There's no depth really outside of like Anthony Del Orso coming off the bench. So I don't think there's a ton of scoring talent outside of Caleb Love here. But I looked back at last year's matchup and Arizona absolutely smashed them. I believe it was like 98-73 or something like that. Just destroyed them, beat them up on the glass, which is a spot that Wisconsin typically does. They're usually a great defensive rebounding team, but the Arizona front court was just a little bit too much for them. And it could be the same kind of story this year because Arizona has even more front court depth than they had last season. You're starting Toby Awaka. That dude can rebound on both ends, as he's probably one of the best rebounders in the country, especially on the offensive side. But I mean, you look at the other side, Wisconsin added some more size. Like, they're starting Nolan Winter now, another 7-footer to put next to Crowell. And Winter actually has a more versatile skill set than I gave him credit for in the preseason. So he's kind of changed the dynamic of this team on both sides. And if they can operate in the half court efficiently against a solid Arizona defense, they can definitely walk out the door with a win in the Kohl Center.
Yeah, I'm definitely just thankful I don't have to watch Tyler Wall anymore on Wisconsin.
Yeah,
what a frustrating player. They play through him, and for anyone that has watched him before, he's like a 50% shooter as a inside out 4, I guess you could call him. I don't even really know what to call him. Slasher, not really much of a shooter.
Yeah, he got worse as his career went on, which was very surprising. He got like an ankle injury like before his senior year, and he just turned into like a terrible player to be frank on the offensive side. He was always a good defender, but like the shooting and he just didn't do enough things offensively to offset that. So
yeah. Now the final game, just wanted to mention for tomorrow, Florida at Florida State. Big rivalry game. We have a friend, big Florida State fan. He keeps sending messages, buy stock in Florida State now. And he keeps reminding me to don't praise them when it's too late. So I'm going to let him know if he's listening to this, not buying stock in Florida State at any point. Pretty low on this team. And Florida, I think, is a 5-point favorite in this game. I was expecting it to be a little bit higher, maybe a couple points higher. But I expect Florida to go in here and take care of business on the road.
Yeah, I probably won't be buying stock in the Seminoles either. But the one thing I would look at is how Florida State does turning over these Florida guards. And Florida's passed the test so far with their ball security. Like Clayton and Martin's especially been a little bit better than I've thought playmaking wise. He's averaging 3 assists a game right now, and he's actually handled the ball better than I expected. He didn't look like that kind of guy at FAU. So he's been impressive so far. But I do worry about this guard playing a pressure style defense that wants to get up and down. They have a ton of length, and I think they could run into some issues playing on the road here. But ultimately, I do think Florida on the offensive glass can expose Florida State, who's really never great on the defensive glass just because they're super aggressive. And I do think the second chance opportunities are the difference. Although I think this game can be close because I'm not super high on this Florida perimeter defense. Florida State's fairly versatile and can beat probably any of those guys off the dribble. And so overall, I do think I can absolutely see Florida State winning this game, but I'll have Florida edging it out in this game.
Yeah, I do too, as I mentioned. Now the rest of the weekend, not a great slate of games. There's a few on my radar anyway. South Carolina plays at Indiana on Saturday. South Carolina is a team that all preseason long I was pretty low on, and they seem to have proven that to be true so far. But going to play Indiana, so a Power 5 game. Indiana hasn't really had to play anyone yet. So this is a first test for them, I guess, if that's what you want to call it, with their new roster. So going to keep an eye on that game. Probably not a game I'll be watching super intently, but definitely a game that I'll be keeping tabs on afterwards and checking out the box score and highlights. The other game that I had marked down was Notre Dame playing Georgetown. Georgetown, part of that Big East, not a great conference, as we've said right now, and they haven't really looked that great either. Notre Dame's that team that we were both pretty high on in the preseason to buy some stock in, right? And that's a team I'm going to continue to praise and buy stock in over the next 3, 4, 5 years. I'm pretty high on them as long as Micah Shrewsbury's there.
Yeah, that should be a pretty good game. I just think Shrewsbury has the edge over Ed Cooley. Notre Dame's offense has been a little bit underwhelming so far, but ultimately, I do think Shrewsbury is going to come up with a good game plan to beat these fairly undisciplined Georgetown guards, and I think they can do enough work on the defensive glass to keep the athleticism of Georgetown off it. So I think Notre Dame goes on the road and gets a win.
Yeah, and then Wake Forest is playing at Xavier. Wake Forest has not looked very good. They played last night, right? Played a close one. I forget who they played, but definitely hasn't looked as good offensively as we would have expected. And they go play Xavier, who also hasn't played super well. But this feels like a game that could really go either way. Like Wake Forest needs to play some better basketball, but it's at Xavier. Personally, I would probably give the slight edge to Xavier right now, just because of the home court. But I think this will probably be a good game. I don't know how pretty it's going to look, though, based on how these two teams have played.
Yeah, give me Xavier here for sure. I think the Wake offense has real issues, and Steve Forbes teams are typically predicated off of how their offense is. They don't even have a point guard right now. Like Tyler Johnson is not hurt, and he hasn't played a second the last 2 games. So that's something to monitor. They're having Hunter Salas play point guard. He's an off-ball guard. He's not a guy you run offense through. He's a secondary guy who needs to be in full scoring mode. Like they beat Michigan the other day, and they actually didn't even look good. Michigan kind of handed them that game by turning the ball over so much. And Wake also just lost like a defensive depth piece in Omaha Ballou. So, I mean, Trayvon Spillers has been great, but if he's going to have to play small ball 5, they don't have anybody to play next to him now. So I do think I could see the defense taking a bit of a slide too. And I wouldn't be surprised, like if they lost like a few games that they should absolutely win. I wouldn't be surprised if Xavier won this game pretty comfortably, despite their defense not being that great so
far. Yeah. Now Sunday there are a couple games. I know the team you're pretty high on, St. John's. They're playing New Mexico. This is a good early test for them at Madison Square Garden. New Mexico had the big win last Friday night against UCLA. So this will be another early test for them against a quality opponent.
Yeah, this game's going to be a track meet. New Mexico plays at the fastest pace in the country, and St. John's isn't too far behind them. There's not really a lot of shooting in this contest, so there's going to be a lot of getting up and down the floor, trying to score at the rim. Could see a lot of fouls in this game, but overall, I mean, it's
a lot of free throws coming.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be fun to see the Patinos match up against each other. They probably know each other. They know each other's styles so well, and honestly, it just should be a fun game to watch. I don't really have a particular lean on who I think is going to win the game. I think it could end up being a tight game just because of the familiarity with each other. And arguably, New Mexico might have the best guard on the floor in Donovan Dent. Like, I would say he's probably the most talented guard in the game. And he's just so crafty around the rim, and he could ultimately be the decision maker if the game happens to slow down late.
Yeah, that should be a fun game. Starting at noon, so before football really gets going on Sunday. Then the other game, Clemson playing Boise State. Boise State, as we've talked about, struggling a little bit at guard. They need another guard, and that's not just going to magically come up at this point in the season. So I think that they could definitely struggle with Clemson here on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I thought either Chris Lockett or Javon Buchanan was really going to step up and be that second guard, but it hasn't really happened yet. And I wouldn't be surprised if Clemson goes that game just because they have one extra guard. Like they have Chase Hunter and Jane Zachary. So, I mean, they're going to win the guard battle, and they have the size to contend with Boise State's positional size with Dagenhart and Meadow and Omar Stanley and Dylan Anderson at the center position. And I think Clemson can match that. But I do think that extra guard that Clemson has is probably going to be the difference maker in this game.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's too early to give a super strong opinion on some of these games, as we've said. It's hard to give a strong lean on which way we'd go, but I think for this one, early indications to me would be Clemson.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely.
Yeah, but should be a fun weekend of games. Looking forward to watching them, especially tomorrow night. I think tomorrow definitely has the best slate of the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Tomorrow should be super fun. It feels like a college basketball Saturday in conference, like what we're going to start getting in January. But we're just getting it on a Friday. We have 3 or 4 really marquee matchups that are going to be super fun to watch.
Yeah, no doubt. So looking forward to breaking those down in the next show on Sunday. Between now and then, listen to this episode check out some of the content we're going to be coming out with tomorrow, and continue to check out the socials. Follow the social. We're getting close now to the giveaway drawing. For those of you watching on video, this crew neck is one of the pieces that will be raffled off to one of our 200 followers. So definitely looking forward to that. We're getting close to that benchmark. So hope you all enjoy the games this weekend, and we'll talk to you Sunday night for episode 7.